Hi there, my name is Kaitlin and I have been asked to make a video showing you how to make some reusable masks. Now, I know that in Wisconsin you guys aren't dealing with quite the level of COVID-19 that we are here in Michigan, which is where I live, but in any case, these can be very helpful. And if you hit the point in Wisconsin, which I hope you don't, where as they are in Michigan, they're asking us to wear masks anytime that we leave the house to go grocery shopping or anything like that, which is basically the only time we're allowed to leave the house. Then you have a way to do so safely, as well as then leaving the critical masks and everything, the PPE for the medical professionals. So here is what you're going to need to get started. You are going to need 3 pieces of fabric. You will need one cut out into the following dimensions. So this is 9.5 inches by 7.5 inches. I made a little template. You can make a template as well, especially if you're making more than one. I highly encourage it. And then you're gonna need 2 pieces cut to this size, which will be the liner. And this is 7 inches by 5 inches. Again, I just made a little template. You can use whatever fabric you can get your hands on. I did go out and get some fabric before all of the chaos and craziness started, because I have a sister who's a nurse and a sister-in-law who's a nurse, and I wanted to be able to help in any way that I could. So I've got some fabric. Today we're gonna do some lemons. This is my big piece. And then the lining today is going to be some watermelons. So these are my 2 smaller pieces. So you're gonna need some sort of fabric. If you don't have fabric like this, I just recommend cotton, and not necessarily like your cotton t-shirts. You're gonna wanna go something closer to just like a solid cotton. If you think of like, if you have any old dress shirts or things like that around the house, those are usually cotton and would work well. Or like an old, plaid shirt or something like that. Try and go with that. The reason the t-shirt material isn't the best is because it stretches, and so then there's a lot of space between the fibers, and with the space means that germs can pass in and out a lot easier. So fabric, check. Scissors. I have some lovely fabric scissors. You won't need these a whole lot after you've cut out your pieces, except for to cut strings and stuff like that. So that, an iron. Iron is good. You don't need a big one if you've got a small one. That works just fine. A sewing machine, which I have just off screen here. You do not need to use a sewing machine. It's probably easier. However, if you have a needle and thread, you can do it with that as well. So just know that I'm gonna be popping off and doing it on the sewing machine. To be fair, I only just recently learned how to sew, so I'm still new at that as well. So this will not be a sewing tutorial. It's mainly gonna be how to put together the masks, and then I'll sew things and I'll show you what they should look like, but not a sewing tutorial. So sewing machine, you're gonna need some sort of like pins. So I have some sewing pins. If you also have like little binder clips, you can make those work, and things of that nature, just to hold things in place as you sew them. And then you're gonna need some elastic. Or something of a stretchy, substance. So I know that elastic is hard to come by, at least in Michigan it is right now. I was given this, luckily. So if you don't have elastic, you can use basically anything that stretches, and I'll show you later how you can modify when we're putting in the elastic something. If you just have like a long piece of like t-shirt material, let's say, you could use that as well for the strings or for the elastic, but we'll go through that when we get to that part. So something stretchy to do that. And I think those are the materials that you need. Fabric, scissors, pins, iron, sewing machine, templates if you've got them. All right, so the end goal, what we're looking to make, I've got a couple of them here that I've made already. So here's one that's got the watermelon pattern, and here's one that's in kind of a blue. So what it's gonna end up looking like is a mask. Ooh, right? Who would have guessed? But no, it'll end up being one fabric on the outside, different fabric on the inside. And then this obviously stretches and opens so that it covers your whole, you know, nose and mouth. And then also on the back, the reason that we're doing this kind is because you can put a filter in it. Now, cotton masks on their own do not do a whole lot as far as the prevention of spreading of germs. So I'm gonna tell you that right now. I intentionally picked one that has a filter because if you put a filter in it, so a non-woven filter, which can be anything from a coffee filter to a dry baby wipe, and I'm a mom, so I've got those. So that's what I've used. You can put that inside this little pocket on the back, right? And then you have a filter in between there, and then when you go to use it, you have that as well. So it'll end up looking something like this. So it's pleated on the front, it'll have the elastic for around the back, and then the filter pocket on the other side. That's what we're going for. All right, so let's get started. The first thing that you're gonna need is you're gonna need your 2 liner pieces of fabric. So what we're gonna do is we're going to take the fabric and we're going to fold up the fabric just a little bit. I mean, it's probably about a finger width. And we're just gonna fold that up and we're gonna iron it. Ironing it is going to allow the seam to lay flat and make it easier to sew. Most of the time that we do this, that we iron anything, it's just so that it makes it easier to sew it or to have things lay evenly. So we're gonna do this on both of them. Make sure it's nice and good. Now, as you can see, it's laying pretty flat, so I'm not even gonna pin it, I'm just gonna sew it as is. So what you're gonna go through and do is you're going to sew all the way across on both of the pieces of fabric. So we'll see you in just a sec. All right, and we're back. So as you can see, all I've done is I have sewn the seam across the edge there. It's always a good idea if you have a sewing machine to reinforce the edges of things, particularly at a couple points in this, but all I did was just sewed the seam right along there, and to both of these. Now you're going to need to take your main fabric, lay it face up, so design up, whatever that's going to look like for you. So design up, and then what you're going to do is you are going to place your little liner pieces that you just sewed at the top and bottom with the part that you just sewed facing towards the middle. So what's going to happen is when we sew this and then flip it over, we will then have it on the back side for the filter. So I just try and make sure it's about even with the part from each other on either side. Try to make sure it's kind of centered, and then I go through and I do that on the top as well. So they should overlap. If they don't, you probably cut something out wrong. So you're gonna wanna make sure that they lay flat, that they lay on top of each other, because if you cut them the same size, they should both line up correctly. And they should be about the same width apart from the 2 edges. Now this is a part where I am going to use some pins. I'm just going to probably use 2 on each side, and it's just so that I can pin this for when I sew, because you're going to sew near the edge, not directly on the edge, but near the edge for this, so you don't need to have it on the edge, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I just probably do 2 just so that it stays where it's supposed to stay while I'm trying to sew. So 2 on the top there, which I realize is your bottom, and 2 on the bottom over here. And again, just to make sure that it's going to stay where it needs to stay when we go through and sew it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to sew the edge. So this side up, and we're going to go through and sew from the edge of my liner fabric to the other side. You're going to not touch the 2 ends. You don't need to do anything with those 2 ends right now, so don't worry about those. Just do the parts that are overlapping that you actually need to join together. All right, so we are back. As you can see, I have sewn along the two edges and removed the pins now. You will have some extra strings and everything. You can just cut those off as you go. Just makes it easier. So what we're gonna do next is we are going to flip our fabric over. Now, we're going to have to do a little bit of ironing to even out some seams here. So you can do it one of two ways. The easiest is probably just to fold over, as you can see, like I have done, and then to just iron this flat. So right up against the seam that you just created, you're just ironing that seam flat. And this will come into play when we flip it around to then do the back, because you'll have a nice sharp seam to work with, which will make the process a lot easier. So it doesn't take a lot. So once you've done that, you're gonna flip it over. So we have our two sides here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna fold it down to the middle. So as you can see, here is where I've sewn through. So you're just gonna try and line it up with that and then lay it flat, like so. So you want it to be right at the seam, right at the edge, because this side, the front side, will be the mask, and this side is the liner. So you wanna make sure that it's a clear distinction between the two sides. And then you're just gonna iron that down as well. Again, makes it easier, especially for the next step. The next step is the tricky step where we have to pleat our mask. So if you do not have a good sharp seam here, a nice crease, I should say, not a seam, but a nice crease, it's gonna make it a lot harder to do the pleating. So just try and make sure you're as close as possible there, and then you're gonna do it to the other side as well. So line it up with the edge and then just iron that crease. Give everything kind of a once over iron together. All right, do note that this is a bit hot to touch, so don't go crazy here. Let it cool a little bit before you're doing anything. But as you should be able to notice, everything should still be pretty lined up. If it's slightly off, it's probably just because of the folding and the seam here. Or you may have sewn a slightly crooked line when you were sewing these two fabrics together. If that's the case, you can kind of help fix it at this point with the ironing of the crease. So if it's a little crooked, what you'd rather have is a little bit of the front material on the back as opposed to the back on the front. So you would just cheat that line a little bit so that it's even. Then we're gonna flip this over. So obviously this is gonna end up being the pocket, but we're gonna flip this over, and then like I said, next comes the challenging part. So I have flipped it over. You wanna make sure that your liner is laying flat underneath there, which is probably part of the hardest part anyway. It's just making sure everything is laying nice and flat. If you want to give it another once over real quick with the iron, feel free to do so. Like I said, I try and get it as clean and clear as possible at this point because it does get a bit challenging. So here we've come to the part where you're going to pleat the mask. So we're going to end up doing 3 pleats, so 3 pinches and pins. So I am going to use pins for this. You can, like I said, use the little binder clips if you have those, or anything that you can to just kind of keep the fabric together. But we're going to do 3 pleats. So what you're going to do is you're pinching not only the top fabric but also the bottom fabric. So that's why it's a little tricky. You want to make sure that you get both. So you're going to start about probably like an inch from the top, and you're going to pinch and fold down. Now, as you can tell, this is not even, so I'm going to do it again. And you may have to do that. So pinch, pleat, that's a lot better. And you can always fix it kind of, just remember that the fabric underneath has to come with it. So you can tell, I mean, obviously if you're not lined up, it won't be even on the sides either. So just kind of keep an eye out for that. So I'm satisfied with this pleat. So I'm gonna go through and pin it. I intentionally pin it out at the far spot out because that way I can sew through this without having to adjust the pins. So I don't have a whole lot that I pin. And you do have to be careful because when I pin like this, it's obviously sticking quite a ways out the side, and I don't want to poke myself. So, but pin, make sure that you get all of the layers. That is very important. So first one, now we're gonna repeat that 2 more times. So pinch right below, so pinch, and then you're gonna fold down. And if you want to have more of a little bit more space, you can give it a little bit lower of a pinch. You just want it to be its own pleat. So if you're pulling on the pleat above it, that means that you've grabbed up a little too high. So you can just go ahead and redo. And you may finish this part and be like, I don't like how that looks, and end up redoing the whole pleating thing. I have done that before. So, pleat number 2, and then I'm going to do the same thing. Pinch, again, make sure you get that bottom layer. I can feel my bottom layer moving a little bit, so I'm just gonna tuck my thumbs underneath there to make sure that I grab it. So pinch, fold down, again, make sure it's even from side to side. Doesn't have to be even from top to bottom. That part's not nearly as important. Because it will spread out just fine, regardless of how high up or how low you finish your pleats. It will still spread out okay. Just make sure that from the sides here you have the same, that they're even. All right, so this is what you end up having. 3 pleats on the front. The back is gonna look like this, or something close to this. So my pocket is right in here. And so now what we're gonna do, I realize that this looks like it popped out a little bit, so I'm gonna readjust that before I sew it through. But what's going to happen now is I'm going to sew now along this little way here. Okay, so right on the edge of my liner fabric to my outer fabric. So I'm gonna sew this side up right along this edge and right along the other edge. Be careful, I always go in this way, which is opposite for you, I realize, because you're looking at it upside down. But you want to make sure your pleats are laying down when it's being fed into the machine. If they're not, then the pleats can pull up and that can cause a problem. So that's what you're kind of aiming for. All right? You made it through the hard part. Here we go. All right. So I'm done with that part. Sorry for the change in lighting. The sun has been out and the sun is moving in the sky, so I don't have the same sunlight anymore. But as you can see, I have sewn through on both sides the edges here. So it's not right along the edge, but it's close. And on the front, you can see through it as well. So what's gonna happen now is we're going to take each of the sides and we're going to fold them over like so. Hopefully you can see that all right. So you're gonna fold and then you're going to iron this part down so that it's a smooth seam, right? Or again, I keep saying seam, I mean crease. Now, it won't stay straight down. I'm gonna warn you that right now. But you're folding it to that line that you just sewed. So as you can see, where I folded that down is to that line. Okay, so you're gonna fold it to that line and then you're gonna fold it over again, right over top of itself. And you're gonna fold it basically to the line that you just created when you sewed. So what you're doing here is you're creating a little pocket through which we're gonna put the elastic. So it should be folded the second time along that seam that you did sew, and that time I do mean seam. So what you're gonna do here is you're gonna iron again, and again, it's not gonna stay down, but this does make it easier when you go through to sew it, okay? So we're gonna do this to both sides, and then you can pin it if you'd like. Oh, it's hot. Be careful. Hot. And when I pin this one in particular, I pin back towards this edge because for this one you're going to be sewing along this further side, the inner side here. So I did that side. Again, the exact same thing. I'm gonna fold this initially to the seam that I just created the first time. So iron that one. And again, it's gonna be hot, so be careful when you touch it. My fingers are a little burnt. Give it a second. And then you're gonna fold it again onto that seam that you just created. So you should see that back on the edge here. So iron one more time. I'm gonna grab a pin so that I'm ready here. So it's been ironed. Holy guacamole, it's hot. Be careful. You'd think as an adult I would be able to manage that, but you know. And then again, you're gonna just pin it in here. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna go through and you're gonna sew on both sides. And again, you're gonna sew on the inner part of this fold here. So I'm not gonna sew up this top seam. I'm gonna sew down here near the bottom of this. And again, that's gonna create a little pocket for us to put the elastic through. So I'll be right back. All right, as you can see, we now have our new seam that we just put in on both sides here. Now what this did is it created a little pocket for us, if you can see here, that we're gonna stick the elastic through. So what I have is I have my elastic here, and I attached it to a pin on the end. Now the reason I did this is because if I have the pin, I can kind of push it through a little bit easier, because this elastic is not very stiff, so it's kind of hard to just get it through on its own. But if you attach it to the pin, then it goes through and you can just pull it through. So this is what you're gonna end up having. Now, if all you have is old pieces of fabric or cotton or whatever, what you're gonna do is you're gonna leave it just like this, all right, on both sides. Because that way then you can take this and you would tie around your face this side to this side behind your head and then on the bottom. And that's totally fine. If, however, you're going to do it like I'm going to do it, then we're going to adjust this slightly and we're going to go ahead and unpin that. And I'm going to tie this together. Now, I'm just gonna go through and I'm gonna knot it. Maybe. Easier said than done. So I'm just gonna scooch it through, knot, and then slide it up as close as you can to the end there, because you want as much of the elastic as you can. And then you just slide this guy right inside, and then he's gone. And then you can't see him. And then you have the ear strap. Now I'm gonna do it to the other side. I'll be right back. Ta-da! It's done. So hopefully yours looks something like this. Not in pattern or style necessarily, but hopefully you've got something that looks like a mask at the end of this. So now in order to wear it, you'd spread out kind of the front. Well, first you'd put a filter in the back. So you'd put a little filter in, nice little pocket there, and then you would just use it as so. And adjust as need be. But I have a good mask that now can keep hopefully me safe as well as other people around me. So hopefully this worked for you. Have a great spring break and happy Easter season. Take care, guys.